The morning sun shone through the windows of the Thompson mansion as Rachel Anderson rushed to get everything ready. She had worked as a maid for the wealthy Thompson family for 15 years, but today was different. Today was supposed to be young Master David Thompson's wedding day. Rachel's hands trembled as she dusted the antique furniture in the grand living room. She couldn't shake off the feeling that something wasn't right. David had been acting strange lately, especially since his father's company merged with their biggest competitor. "Rachel, did you see David this morning?" Martha, the head housekeeper, hurried into the room. Her usually neat grey hair was messy and worry lines creased her forehead. "No, I haven't. Isn't he in his room getting ready?" "He's gone, Rachel. His bed hasn't been slept in and his car is missing." Rachel's heart sank. She had practically raised David after his mother died. She knew him better than anyone, even better than his fiancée, Victoria Pierce, the daughter of his father's business partner. The sound of car tires on gravel made both women rush to the window. Instead of David, they saw Victoria stepping out of her luxury car, already wearing her wedding dress. Her mother, Eleanor Pierce, followed close behind, barking orders at the wedding planners. "Someone needs to tell them," Martha whispered. "I'll do it," Rachel volunteered, though her heart was heavy. She had never liked Victoria. The woman was beautiful and sophisticated, but there was something cold about her, something calculated. As Rachel walked toward Victoria, she noticed James Thompson, David's father, having an intense conversation on his phone near the garden. His face was red with anger. "What do you mean he withdrew $5 million? James shouted into the phone. "Lock down all his accounts immediately." Rachel stopped in her tracks. What had David done? Just then, another car pulled up to the mansion. Out stepped Sarah Miller, the young nurse who had been taking care of James after his recent heart surgery. She was supposed to be off duty today, but there she was, looking nervous and clutching her purse tightly. "Mr. Thompson," Sarah called out softly, "I need to tell you something." Rachel watched as Sarah handed James an envelope. His hands shook as he read the letter inside. "David was with you?" he asked, his voice barely controlled. "He asked me to give you this letter, sir. He said he couldn't go through with the wedding. He said the truth about the company merger needed to come out." Victoria, who had been approaching them, overheard everything. "What is she talking about?" she demanded. "Where is David?" James crumpled the letter in his fist. "Call security," he ordered Rachel. "No one leaves this property until we sort this out." But Sarah wasn't done. "There's more, Mr. Thompson. David found documents about what really happened to his mother 12 years ago. He knows it wasn't an accident." The color drained from James Thompson's face. Rachel felt her knees go weak. She had always suspected there was more to Mrs. Thompson's death, but she had buried those thoughts deep inside. Victoria's perfect makeup couldn't hide her growing panic. "Daddy!" she called out to Richard Pierce, who was just arriving. "We need to do something." Richard Pierce's reaction was unexpected. Instead of looking worried, a small smile played on his lips. "Oh, James," he said, "I told you keeping your son in the dark was a mistake." The morning that was supposed to be filled with wedding music and celebration had turned into something else entirely. As Rachel looked around at all the faces, James's guilt, Victoria's anger, Sarah's quiet determination, and Richard's smug satisfaction, she knew nothing would ever be the same at the Thompson mansion. And somewhere out there was David, the boy she had raised, finally fighting back against the web of lies that had surrounded him all his life. Rachel silently prayed he would be safe, wherever he was. The wedding guests would start arriving soon, but the real drama was just beginning to unfold. David Thompson drove his black Mercedes down the empty highway, his hands gripping the steering. Wheels so tight his knuckles turned white. The manila envelope on the passenger seat contained everything he needed to expose the truth: bank statements, secret contracts, and old police reports about his mother's death. His phone wouldn't stop ringing. 20 missed calls from Victoria, 15 from his father, and dozens of text messages he couldn't bear to read. Only one message mattered, the one from Sarah telling him she had delivered his letter. Sarah. He smiled, thinking about her. If it wasn't for her accidentally finding those documents while organizing his father's medical records, he might have gone through with the wedding. He might have married Victoria without ever knowing the truth about his family's company or his mother's death. "You deserve to know," Sarah had told him 3 days ago, her gentle brown eyes full of concern. "But please be careful. These people, they're dangerous." David pulled into a small roadside diner, far enough from the city that no one would recognize him. As he sat in a corner booth, a breaking news alert flashed on the diner's old TV. Thompson-Pierce wedding cancelled. Corporate merger in jeopardy. The key. Waitress, an older woman with kind eyes, brought him a coffee. "You look like you're running from something, honey," she said. "Not running," David answered, fighting back. His phone buzzed again. This time it was Rachel, the only person from home he still trusted. "David, thank God you answered. Are you safe?" "I'm fine, Rachel. How bad is it there? Your father's furious. Victoria's threatening to sue for emotional distress. But that's not why I'm calling. Sarah, they're saying she stole confidential documents. Security is looking for her." David's heart raced. "What? She didn't steal anything. Those documents prove my father and Richard Pierce committed fraud. They're trying to silence her." "There's more." Rachel's voice dropped to a whisper. "I overheard Richard Pierce talking on the phone. He mentioned something about taking care of the situation like they did 12 years ago. David, I think he was talking about your mother." The coffee cup in David's hand shook. 12 years ago, his mother had supposedly died in a car accident after threatening to expose corrupt practices at the company. Now he knew it wasn't an accident at all. "Rachel, I need you to do something for me. In my room, behind the painting of the lighthouse, there's a safe. The combination is Mom's birthday. Inside you'll find more documents. Get them and bring them to Sarah. She'll know what to do." "Of course, but where is she?" "I can't tell you that. Just know we have a plan. And Rachel, thank you for everything." After hanging up, David opened the manila envelope and spread the documents on the table. Emails proving his father and Richard Pierce had been embezzling money for years. Records showing they had bribed officials to cover up environmental violations. And most damning of all, a private investigator's report suggesting his mother's brake lines had been deliberately cut. The diner's door chimed as 2 men in dark suits walked in. David's instincts told him they weren't there for the coffee. He quickly gathered the documents, left money on the table, and slipped out the back door. As he started his car, he saw the men running out of the diner. David sped away, his mind racing. He needed to get these documents to the district attorney, but first, he had to make sure Sarah was safe. She had risked everything to help him uncover the truth. He wouldn't let her become another victim of his father's crimes. His phone buzzed, with a text from an unknown number. "Storage Unit 23, Blue Harbor Marina. Come alone, bring everything." He recognized the code they had set up. Sarah was safe, waiting at their predetermined meeting spot, but he knew they couldn't stay there long. His father's influence reached far, and Richard Pierce's threats weren't empty words. As David drove toward the marina, he thought about everything he'd lost: his trust in his father, his comfortable life, his supposed perfect marriage to Victoria. But he had gained something more valuable: the truth about his mother, and a chance to make things right. The sun was setting over the water when he pulled into the marina parking lot. In Unit 23, Sarah waited with more evidence she'd managed to gather. Together they would expose everything, no matter the cost. "Are you sure about this?" Sarah asked when she saw him. "Once we do this, there's no going back." David took her hand, remembering how she had been the only one brave enough to show him the truth. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Behind them, the last rays of sunlight disappeared, and with them, David's old life. Tomorrow, the real fight would begin. Victoria Pierce stormed into her father's study, throwing her wedding veil onto his expensive mahogany desk. Her perfect white dress was wrinkled, and her mascara had left black streaks down her cheeks. "This is a disaster," she screamed. "Do you know what people are saying? They're calling me the jilted bride. My reputation is ruined." Richard Pierce barely looked up from his computer. "Calm down, Victoria. Everything is under control." "Under control? David is out there somewhere with evidence that could destroy us. And that nurse, that nothing of a woman, helped him." Richard finally met his daughter's gaze. I said everything is under control. Our men will find David and Sarah soon enough. Now sit down. There's something you need to know about your role in all this." At the Thompson mansion, James Thompson paced in his office while his security team gave their report. "No sign of them at any of Mr. David's usual places, sir. But we did track his credit card to a diner about 3 hours north." "You're all useless," James shouted, throwing a crystal glass against the wall. The crash brought Rachel running to the door. "Mr. Thompson, please calm down. Think of your heart condition." James turned on her, his face red with rage. You practically raised him. You must know where he is." "I don't, sir. And even if I did," Rachel stood her ground, "I wouldn't tell you." Before James could respond, Richard Pierce walked in with Victoria. Now, James, don't take it out on the help. We have more important matters to discuss." Rachel quietly slipped away, her heart pounding. As soon as she was out of sight, she pulled out her phone and sent a quick text. "They're tracking your credit card. Ditch it now." At the Blue Harbor Marina, David and Sarah were going through the evidence when his phone buzzed with Rachel's. "Warning, we need to move," David said, quickly gathering the documents. "They're getting close." Sarah looked up from her laptop. "Wait, I just found something in your mother's old emails. Look at this." David leaned over her shoulder to read the screen. It was an email his mother had written the day before she died, but it had never been sent. The draft was addressed to a journalist at the Daily Tribune. "I have proof that Thompson Industries has been dumping toxic waste into Silver Lake for the past decade," the email read. "The medical records show a spike in cancer cases in the surrounding communities. Richard Pierce authorized the dumping, and my husband helped cover it up. I'm meeting with an environmental lawyer tomorrow. If anything happens to me," David's hands shook. "Silver Lake. That's where thousands of people get their drinking water. And look at the lawyer's name," Sarah pointed. "Margaret Chen. She's still practicing in the city." Just then, they heard footsteps outside the storage unit. David quickly turned off the lights, pulling Sarah into the shadows. Through the small gap under the door, they could see several pairs of feet moving past. Sarah's warm breath tickled his ear as she whispered, "What do we do?" For a moment, David was distracted by how close she was, by the faint scent of her shampoo. "Focus," he told himself. "We need to get to Margaret Chen, but first, we have to get out of here without being seen." Back at the Pierce mansion, Victoria sat at her vanity, removing her wedding makeup. Her father's words echoed in her mind. "The merger must happen with or without a wedding. You need to play your part." She picked up her phone and dialed a familiar number. "Hello? Yes, this is Victoria Pierce. I'd like to make a statement to the press about David Thompson's mental state. Yes, I'm worried about him. He's been acting paranoid lately, making wild accusations. I fear he might be having some kind of breakdown." Meanwhile, Rachel was in David's room, her hands trembling as she reached behind the lighthouse painting. The safe opened with a soft click. Inside, she found more documents, just as David had said, but also something unexpected, a small recorder and a note in his mother's handwriting. "If you're reading this, I'm probably dead. The truth is on this tape." Rachel's heart nearly stopped when she heard Martha's warning whisper from the doorway. "Someone's coming!" She quickly stuffed everything into her apron pockets, just as James Thompson appeared in the doorway. "What are you doing in my son's room?" "Just cleaning, sir. Everything's so dusty with him gone." James stared at her for a long moment. "You've worked here for 15 years, Rachel. Don't throw it all away by helping him. David doesn't know what he's getting into." "No, sir," Rachel replied quietly. "I think for the first time, he knows exactly what he's doing." As she walked past him, the recorder felt heavy in her pocket. Whatever was on that tape, she had to get it to David. But first, she needed to warn Sarah. The poor girl had no idea that Victoria's new press statement was about to paint her as the manipulative nurse who helped a mentally unstable man flee his own wedding. In the marina's back alley, David and Sarah crouched behind a dumpster, watching the security men search the area. They were trapped, with guards at both ends of the alley. "Do you trust me?" Sarah whispered, squeezing his hand. David looked into her eyes, remembering how she had risked everything to show him the truth. How different she was from Victoria, who had only ever cared about appearances and money. "With my life," he answered, Sarah smiled and pulled out her phone. Good, because I have a crazy idea. Sarah's crazy idea turned out to be brilliant in its simplicity. While the security men searched the storage units, she and David slipped onto a fishing boat where her uncle Mario worked. Hidden under tarps and fishing nets, they made their way out of the marina. "I can't believe that worked," David whispered, as they watched the marina lights fade into the distance. "My Uncle Mario's been helping people in trouble since before I was born," Sarah explained. "He says sometimes the simplest plan is the best one." The gentle rocking of the boat and the salty air reminded David of summers spent with his mother. She used to take him sailing, just the two of them. Those were the only times she seemed truly happy. His phone vibrated, another message from Rachel. "Found something in your safe. Your mother left a tape. It's important. Meeting point." David's heart raced. A tape from his mother. After all these years. "We need to get that tape," Sarah said, reading the message over his shoulder. "But they'll be watching Rachel." Before David could respond, breaking news alerts started flooding their phones. Victoria's face was all over the media, tears streaming down her perfect cheeks as she spoke to reporters. "I'm so worried about David." Victoria's voice trembled perfectly. "He's been under so much stress lately, making terrible accusations about his own family. That nurse, Sarah Miller, she took advantage of his vulnerable state. She filled his head with conspiracy theories." "That lying witch," Sarah gasped. David grabbed her hand. "Hey, look at me, we know the truth, that's what matters." But Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "They're destroying my reputation. I'll never be able to work as a nurse again." Meanwhile, at a small coffee shop across town, Rachel sat nervously checking her watch. Martha had helped her sneak out of the mansion, but she knew she didn't have much time. A tall man in a leather jacket sat down across from her. "You said you had something for me?" Detective Mike Rodriguez asked quietly. Rachel had known Mike for years. He'd been the only cop who'd tried to really investigate Mrs. Thompson's death 12 years ago. Before he could get far, he'd been suddenly transferred to traffic duty. "Mrs. Thompson left this," Rachel whispered, sliding the recorder across the table. "I haven't listened to it yet," I figured. "Maybe you should hear it first." Mike pocketed the recorder just as Rachel's phone chimed. It was a text from Martha. "They know you took something from the safe. Get out now." At the Pierce mansion, Richard Pierce was having a very different kind of meeting. A man in an expensive suit handed him a file. "Everything you asked for, sir. Sarah Miller's entire history. And I found something interesting about her uncle. Mario Ramirez. He owns a fishing boat." Richard smiled coldly. "Alert our friends at the Coast Guard. Tell them to search every boat leaving the marina. Report any suspicious passengers." Victoria, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped in. "Daddy, is all this really necessary? Maybe if we just talked to David." "Talked?" Richard laughed harshly. "Your ex-fiancé has evidence that could send us all to prison, and you want to talk. But the things he found about his mother, are they true?" Richard's face hardened. "Go back to your room, Victoria. Let the grown-ups handle this." On Mario's fishing boat, David and Sarah huddled in the small cabin, planning their next move. The tape had to be connected to whatever his mother had discovered about Silver Lake. They needed to get to Detective Rodriguez, but how? Suddenly, Mario burst into the cabin. "Coast Guard's doing random searches. They're stopping every boat." Sarah's phone buzzed, a text from Rachel. "Got the tape to Mike. He says meet at Rosie's Diner off Highway 27. Come at dawn." Dawn was hours away. They needed somewhere to hide until then. "I know a place," Sarah said softly. "My grandmother's old cottage. It's abandoned now, but it's perfect," David finished. He trusted her completely, a feeling that both thrilled and terrified him. Mario managed to dock at a small private pier before the Coast Guard reached them. As David and Sarah slipped away into the night, Mario called after them, "Be careful, mijitos. Bad people do bad things when they're desperate." The walk to Sarah's grandmother's cottage took over an hour. They stayed off the main roads, jumping at every sound. Finally, they saw it. A small wooden house almost hidden by overgrown gardens. "It's not much," Sarah apologized, unlocking the door with a key hidden under a flower pot. But to David, it was beautiful, simple, honest. everything his world hadn't been. Inside, Sarah lit some old candles she found in a drawer. Their warm light cast soft shadows on the walls. For the first time since this crazy day began, they had a moment to breathe. "Why did you help me?" David asked suddenly. "You risked everything." Sarah turned to face him, the candlelight making her eyes sparkle. "Because it was the right thing to do, and because..." Before she could finish, David's phone rang. It was Detective Rodriguez. "David, listen carefully." Mike's voice was urgent. "I just finished listening to your mother's tape. You need to know what really happened 12 years ago. But I'm not the only one looking for you. They've got roadblocks on every highway, and David, they've just issued a warrant for Sarah's arrest." Outside the cottage, a twig snapped in the darkness. Someone was watching them. David quickly pulled Sarah away from the window as a flashlight beam swept across the cottage. They crouched in the darkness, hardly daring to breathe. "The back door," Sarah whispered. "Through the kitchen." They crawled across the old wooden floor, wincing at every creak. Just as they reached the kitchen, they heard the front door being forced open. "Clear." "The house," a gruff voice ordered. "Mr. Pierce wants them found tonight." Sarah led David to a hidden cellar door under a worn rug. Her grandmother had used it to store preserves, but now it would be their escape route. They descended into the musty darkness just as footsteps entered the kitchen above. Meanwhile, at the police station, Detective Mike Rodriguez sat in his car, listening to Mrs. Thompson's tape for the third time. Her voice, recorded 12 years ago, was filled with fear and determination. "James and Richard think I don't know about their deal with chemical solutions," Mrs. Thompson's voice said. "They've been dumping toxic waste into Silver Lake for years. The money, millions of dollars, all hidden in offshore accounts. I found the records, and tomorrow I'm taking everything to the EPA. If you're hearing this, it means they got to me first. Richard Pierce threatened me yesterday. He said accidents happen all the time." Mike's hands gripped the steering wheel. He finally had proof of what he'd suspected all those years ago. But before he could start his car, his passenger door opened. Victoria Pierce slid into the seat. "Don't look so surprised, Detective," she said quietly. "We need to talk." Back at the Thompson mansion, Rachel was in trouble. Security had found empty spots in David's safe, and James Thompson was furious. "Where is it?" he demanded. "What did you take?" "Mr. Thompson, please," Martha tried to intervene. "Rachel's worked here for years. She's..." "Family." "Family," James laughed bitterly. "Family doesn't betray you. Family doesn't steal from you. Just like that nurse corrupted my son, you've turned against me too." Rachel stood her ground. "No, sir. You corrupted yourself. Mrs. Thompson knew what you were doing, and you let them kill her." The color drained from James's face. For a moment, he looked old and afraid. "You don't understand," he whispered. "Richard Pierce, he owns everything. Banks, judges, police. I had no choice." "There's always a choice," Rachel said firmly. Before James could respond, his phone rang. It was Richard Pierce. "Turn on the news, James. Now." On every channel, the breaking news was the same. Environmental disaster at Silver Lake. Thousands at risk. EPA launches emergency investigation. In the cellar beneath Sarah's grandmother's cottage, David and Sarah listened to the searchers, moving above them. The cellar had a narrow tunnel leading to the woods, another relic from Prohibition days that Sarah's grandmother had told her about. "We have to get to Mike," David whispered. "That tape could change everything." Sarah squeezed his hand in the darkness. "David, before everything goes crazy again, I need to tell you something. The reason I helped you wasn't just because it was right. David pulled her close, his heart pounding. In the darkness, with danger all around them, nothing had ever felt more real than this moment. "I know," he whispered back. "I feel it too." Their lips met in a soft, tender kiss that felt like coming home. But the moment was broken by a loud crash above them. At the police station parking lot, Victoria was still talking to Mike. "I found something in Daddy's office," she said, her perfect composure cracking. "Files about Silver Lake, about David's mother. I always thought I was doing the right thing, being the perfect daughter, the perfect fiancée. But I was just helping them hide their crimes." "Why are you telling me this?" Mike asked suspiciously. "Because I want to make it right, and because..." Victoria's voice broke. "Because I just found out my father hired someone to tamper with Mrs. Thompson's car. He admitted it to me tonight, laughed about it. Said I needed to understand how the real world works. She handed Mike a USB drive. Everything's here: bank records, emails, proof of the chemical dumping. Enough to bring them all down. Why should I trust you? Because I finally realized something. I never really loved David. I just loved what he represented. Wealth, status, power. But Sarah, the way she risked everything to help him find the truth. That's real love. Meanwhile, at Silver Lake, environmental officials were setting up containment barriers. The lake glowed an unnatural blue in the moonlight, its waters poisoned by years of chemical dumping. In his office, Richard Pierce was making frantic phone calls. I don't care what it costs. Clean it up, shut it down, buy them off, just fix this. But it was too late. The truth was spreading faster than any containment plan could stop it. Under the cottage, David and Sarah heard the searchers finally leave. As they emerged from their hiding place, David's phone lit up with a message from Victoria. I'm with Detective Rodriguez. I'm going to help make this right. I'm sorry for everything. Sarah read the message over his shoulder. Do you believe her? Before David could answer, they heard a car approaching. Through the window, they saw Rachel hurrying toward the cottage, carrying a small suitcase. Martha told me you might be here, Rachel said when they let her in. You need to know. Your father confessed everything to me. About your mother, about Silver Lake. He's ready to talk. The night wasn't over yet. In fact, the real storm was just beginning. James Thompson sat alone in his study, staring at an old photo of his wife. The scotch in his glass remained untouched. The news about Silver Lake played on every channel, but he'd stopped watching hours ago. The door opened slowly. Martha came in with Rachel right behind her. Sir, Martha said gently, there's someone here to see you. David stepped into the room. Sarah stayed close behind him, her hand firmly in his. Son, James whispered, his voice breaking. I'm not here for a reunion, David said firmly. I'm here for the truth, all of it. James looked at his son, really looked at him for the first time in years. He saw his wife's determination in David's eyes, the same fierce need for justice that had gotten her killed. Sit down, James said, pushing the scotch away. It's time you knew everything. At the police station, Victoria paced nervously while Detective Rodriguez went through the files on her USB drive. Her designer heels clicked against the linoleum floor. This is incredible, Mike muttered. Account numbers, transfer records, emails about the chemical dumping. Your father documented everything. He always said knowledge was power, Victoria replied bitterly. He kept records of everyone's crimes so he could control them. Mike looked up sharply. Everyone's? Judges, politicians, business owners. My father has dirt on all of them. Why do you think no one ever investigated Mrs. Thompson's death properly? Before Mike could answer, his computer beeped. Breaking news from Silver Lake. Tests confirm dangerous levels of toxic chemicals. Local hospitals reporting mysterious illnesses. Victoria's hands trembled as she pulled out her phone. There's something else you need to see. Text messages between my father and the man he hired to kill Mrs. Thompson. Back at the Thompson mansion, James was finally telling David the truth. Your mother discovered the chemical dumping by accident. She was volunteering at a clinic near Silver Lake, noticed too many children getting sick. She started asking questions, gathering evidence. And you tried to stop her, David accused. I tried to protect her, James shot back. I told her Richard. Pierce was dangerous, but she wouldn't listen. She was going to expose everything. Sarah spoke up softly. The email we found. She was going to meet with a lawyer. James nodded. Margaret Chen, environmental lawyer. Your mother had arranged to meet her the morning after the accident. He buried his face in his hands. I knew Richard was planning something, but I thought he would just threaten her, maybe try to buy her off. I never thought... You let them kill her, David's voice was cold. I was a coward, James admitted. After she died, Richard took control of everything. The company, the cover-up at Silver Lake, even your marriage to Victoria. It was all part of his plan. Rachel, who had been quietly listening, stepped forward. The tape your mother left. She knew they might kill her. She made sure the truth would come out eventually. Suddenly, Martha burst into the room. Turn on the TV, quick! On every channel, the news was exploding. Video footage showed environmental officials at Silver Lake, police cars surrounding Pierce Industries, and most shocking of all, Richard Pierce being led out of his office in handcuffs. Breaking news: Pierce Industries CEO arrested. Multiple charges including murder. David's phone rang. It was Victoria. "David," she sounded like she'd been crying. "I gave everything to the police. All my father's files, the proof about your mother, everything. I know it doesn't make up for what I did, but..." "Why?" David asked. "Why now?" There was a long pause. "Because Sarah showed me what real love looks like. The way she risked everything. To help you find the truth. I never loved you that way. I was just playing my part in my father's game." As if on cue, Sarah squeezed David's hand. He looked at her, seeing the same courage and honesty that had made him trust her from the beginning. James watched them, seeing the love between them that reminded him so much of what he'd had with his wife, what he'd failed to protect. "David," James said quietly, "there's one more thing you need to know. Your mother, she left something else, something even Richard doesn't know about." He walked to his desk, opened a hidden panel, and pulled out a thick envelope. She knew they might kill her, so she created a trust fund, hidden from everyone. Millions of dollars, meant to help the people of Silver Lake if the truth ever came out. The money, it's yours now to make things right. Outside the study windows, news helicopters circled the mansion. Reporters gathered at the gates. The scandal was exploding, and nothing would ever be the same. David looked at Sarah, then at the envelope in his hands. "We know what we have to do," but before they could move, David's phone buzzed again. This time it was Detective Rodriguez. "David, we've got a problem. Your father's not the only one who knew about your mother's murder, and some very powerful people don't want this story getting out. They're coming for all of you, right now." The lights in the Thompson mansion suddenly went out. Martha rushed to the window. "There are men in black SUVs surrounding the house." "The tunnels," James said quickly. "During Prohibition, your grandfather built escape tunnels. They lead to the old boathouse." David grabbed Sarah's hand. "Where?" "Behind the wine cellar. Rachel knows the way." James looked at his longtime housekeeper. "Get them out of here, please." Rachel nodded, already moving toward the door, but Sarah stopped, turning to James. "You have to come with us. They'll kill you too." Before James could answer, they heard the front door crash open. Heavy footsteps echoed through the mansion. "Go," James ordered. "I'll hold them off. I've been a coward long enough." Martha grabbed his arm. "Not alone, you won't." She pulled a shotgun from behind a cabinet. "My daddy didn't raise no fool. I've been keeping this ready since Mrs. Thompson died." David wanted to stay and fight, but Sarah pulled him away. "We have to protect the evidence. It's what your mother would want." Rachel led them through the kitchen, down to the wine cellar. Behind a false wall, they found a narrow tunnel lit only by their phone flashlights. Meanwhile, at the police station, Victoria paced anxiously while Detective Rodriguez made calls. "What do you mean you can't send backup?" Mike shouted into his phone. "I don't care what the commissioner said. There are witnesses in danger." Victoria grabbed her purse. "I know someone who can help, a journalist. She's been investigating my father for years but never had enough proof." "The one your father couldn't buy off?" "Elena Martinez. She has connections, people who can protect witnesses." Mike hesitated only a moment before grabbing his keys. "Let's go." In the tunnel beneath the Thompson mansion, David, Sarah, and Rachel hurried through the darkness. Water dripped from the ceiling, and rats scurried past their feet. "Your mother used these tunnels," Rachel said as they ran. "The night she found the evidence about Silver Lake. She hid copies of everything down here." Above them, they could hear muffled shouting and what sounded like gunshots. "Martha," Rachel whispered, tears in her eyes. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from her uncle Mario. "Coast Guard's been paid off. Don't trust them. I have friends with a private plane. Can get you to Mexico." But David shook his head. "We can't run. Not now. Too many people have died keeping this secret." They reached the boathouse, carefully pushing open a trap door. The lake stretched before them, its waters glowing unnaturally in the moonlight. Rachel's phone rang. "Martha." "Rachel, we're..." "Okay, James." He remembered he was a Thompson, stood up to them. "The police are finally here, the real police, not Pierce's men. Elena Martinez is here too with a camera crew. They can't hide this anymore. Suddenly they heard a boat engine. A sleek yacht was approaching the boathouse, running dark. "Get down!" David pulled Sarah and Rachel behind some crates. The yacht docked silently. Two men in expensive suits stepped onto the pier. David recognized one of them, Judge William Carter, who had blocked every investigation into Silver Lake. "Find the files," the judge ordered, "and make it look like an accident. Like mother, like son." Sarah squeezed David's hand, but her eyes were fierce, not afraid. She pointed to a rusty chain hanging from the boathouse ceiling, part of an old pulley system. David understood immediately. While the men moved toward the trapdoor, he quietly grabbed the chain. Rachel had already found an old flare gun in a drawer. She took aim at the yacht's fuel tank. Everything happened at once. The chain came crashing down, tangling the men. The flare gun fired, lighting up the night, and police sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. "David!" Victoria's voice rang out. She and Detective Rodriguez were running down the pier, Elena Martinez and her camera crew right behind them. The judge tried to run but slipped on the wet dock. As he fell, papers scattered from his jacket. More evidence, more names, more secrets. Elena's cameras caught everything. "This is Elena Martinez reporting live. We're at the Thompson estate where a massive conspiracy of corruption and murder is finally being exposed." Sarah hugged David tightly. It's over. Really over. But David looked at the glowing waters of Silver Lake, thinking of all the sick children, all the families who had suffered. "No," he said quietly, "this is just the beginning. We have work to do." Rachel picked up the papers the judge had dropped. Names of politicians, business leaders, anyone who had helped cover up the Silver Lake disaster. "Your mother would be proud," she told David. Victoria stepped forward awkwardly. "I know I can never make up for what my family did, but I want to help make this right." Suddenly, Martha's voice called from the shore. "David, Sarah, come quick. Your father, he wants to make a full confession, on camera, about everything." The night was far from over, but as David looked at Sarah, then at the group of people who had risked everything to expose the truth, he knew they would face whatever came next together. Elena's cameras kept rolling as the sun began to rise over Silver Lake. A new day was dawning, and with it, the chance to finally bring justice to a town that had suffered in silence for far too long. The morning sun rose over Silver Lake as James Thompson sat in front of Elena Martinez's cameras. His face was tired but determined. Sarah had cleaned and bandaged the cut on his forehead from the fight, while David stood nearby, watching. His father carefully. "I need to tell the truth," James began, his voice shaking. "About my wife's murder, about Silver Lake, about everything." Eleanor leaned forward. "Take your time, Mr. Thompson. It started 15 years ago. Richard Pierce came to me with a proposal. Chemical Solutions, his new company, needed somewhere to dispose of their waste. Silver Lake was perfect, isolated but close to major highways. The profits would be enormous." David's hands clenched into fists as his father continued. "I knew it was wrong. But Richard, he had dirt on everyone. Politicians, judges, even the EPA inspectors. Anyone who tried to investigate disappeared or got transferred. We thought we were untouchable. Until your wife discovered the truth," Eleanor prompted. James's eyes filled with tears. "Catherine, she was always the strong one. She found medical records, soil samples, everything. She tried to warn me that children were getting sick, but I wouldn't listen." At the police station, Richard Pierce sat in an interrogation room. His expensive suit wrinkled, his arrogance finally cracking. Victoria watched through the one-way glass as Detective Rodriguez laid out the evidence. "We have your files," Mike said. "All of them. The blackmail material you kept on everyone. Judge Carter is already talking, trying to make a deal." Richard's face turned red. "You think you can touch me? I built this town. I owned it." "You don't own anything anymore," Victoria interrupted, entering the room. "It's over, Daddy." Back at Silver Lake, environmental teams were setting up containment barriers. Sarah's uncle Mario had brought his fishing boat to help, along with dozens of other local fishermen. "The chemicals have seeped deep into the groundwater," a scientist explained to David and Sarah. "The cleanup will take years." Sarah squeezed David's hand. That's what your mother's trust fund is for, to help these people. Martha approached them, still holding her shotgun. Those men who broke in? They're singing like canaries. Turns out, they were hired by some big shots in the state capital. More dominoes about to fall. Rachel was organizing volunteers, setting up a makeshift medical station for the families who lived near the lake. We need to test everyone, she explained. Document all the illnesses. Build a case for the class action lawsuit. Elena's camera crew was capturing everything. The contaminated water, the sick children, the determined volunteers. Her voice rang out clear and strong. For 12 years, the people of Silver Lake suffered in silence while corrupt officials and business leaders poisoned their water for profit. But today, thanks to the courage of David Thompson and Sarah Miller, the truth is finally coming to light. Inside the Thompson mansion, David found his father in the study, looking at old family photos. Your mother kept copies of everything in a safety deposit box, James said quietly. The key is in her jewelry box. She tried to tell me the night she died, but I was too afraid to listen. Why didn't you ever tell me the truth? Because I was ashamed. I let them kill her, David. My own wife. All for money and power that meant nothing in the end. Sarah appeared in the doorway. David, there's someone here you need to meet. In the living room, an elderly woman waited. Her hands shook as she held a stack of medical files. This is Mrs. Chen, Sarah explained. Margaret Chen, the environmental lawyer your mother was supposed to meet. I've been gathering evidence for 12 years, Mrs. Chen said. Waiting for someone brave enough to use it. Your mother would be so proud of you both. Victoria arrived with more news. The governor just announced a special investigation. Federal agents are on their way. And Daddy, he's agreed to testify against everyone involved. Why? David asked. Because I told him if he didn't, I would. Some things are more important than family loyalty. Outside, the crowd around Silver Lake had grown. Families who had lost loved ones to mysterious illnesses, workers who had been silenced, journalists who had been threatened, all of them finally able to tell their stories. Martha organized food and drinks for the volunteers. Rachel coordinated with medical teams. Mario and his fellow fishermen used their boats to help the scientists collect water samples. Sarah found David standing alone by the lake, lost in thought. What are you thinking about? She asked softly. My mother. She died trying to save these people. Now we have a chance to finish what she started. Sarah touched his face gently. We will, together. But their moment was interrupted by urgent shouts from the mansion. Elena's crew was running toward them, cameras rolling. David! Sarah! You need to see this! On Elena's laptop, breaking news flashed across the screen. State officials implicated in Silver Lake scandal submit mass resignations. Federal agents raid multiple offices. The story they had fought so hard to expose was now exploding across the nation. But with each new revelation, with each corrupt official exposed, the danger grew. Detective Rodriguez appeared, his face grim. We just intercepted a phone call. There's still one more person involved, someone even Richard Pierce was afraid of, and they're not going to let this story end here. Sarah gripped David's hand tightly as Mike continued. Someone very powerful is coming to Silver Lake. Tonight. Night fell over Silver Lake as a sleek black helicopter approached the Thompson estate. David and Sarah watched from the study window as it landed on the front lawn. Detective Rodriguez had positioned police officers around the property, but everyone knew they might not be enough. Senator Charles Morrison, James Thompson whispered, his face pale. He's the one who introduced me to Richard Pierce 15 years ago. The one who made all this possible. Victoria, who had been reviewing more of her father's files, looked up sharply. The senator, but he's running for president. Exactly, Detective Rodriguez said grimly. Imagine what this scandal would do to his campaign. The senator stepped out of the helicopter, tall and distinguished in his expensive suit. 2 bodyguards flanked him as he walked toward the mansion. Elena's cameras captured everything from hidden positions. Mrs. Chen, Sarah said suddenly, the files she brought. There was something about campaign donations from Chemical Solutions. They rushed to the dining room where Margaret Chen had spread out her documents. The elderly lawyer's hands trembled as she pulled out a thick folder. Here, she said. Millions of dollars in illegal campaign contributions, all traced back to the senator's private accounts. Catherine Thompson found the connection just before she died. Martha burst into the room. He's at the front door, and he's not alone. 3 more SUVs just pulled up. David looked at Sarah, then at the group of people who had risked everything to expose the truth. Let him in, it's time to end this. The senator's footsteps echoed through the mansion as Martha led him to the study. He smiled when he saw David, the kind of smile that had won him elections. David Thompson, he said warmly, you've caused quite a stir. Your mother would be proud. Don't you dare talk about my mother, David growled. The senator's smile didn't waver. I'm here to make a deal. A very generous deal, one that could help everyone. He pulled out a document. Full cleanup of Silver Lake. Medical care for all affected families. A trust fund for future environmental protection. All I need is for you to sign this statement saying Richard Pierce acted alone, that there was no larger conspiracy. Sarah stepped forward. And what about Mrs. Thompson's murder? A tragic accident, the senator said smoothly. Nothing more. Victoria had been quietly recording everything on her phone. Now she spoke up. Like the tragic accident you arranged for Judge Roberts when he threatened to expose the truth 5 years ago. The senator's face hardened. You don't want to make an enemy of me, young lady. Ask your father what happens to people who cross me. We already know, Rachel said, entering with Elena Martinez and her camera crew. We have proof of everything. The senator's bodyguards reached for their weapons, but Detective Rodriguez and his officers were faster, surrounding them. Senator Charles Morrison, Mike said formally. You're under arrest for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and accessory to murder. You can't touch me, the senator snarled. I made this town. I made all of you. Not anymore, Elena said, her cameras rolling. This is going out live across the country. Every network, every social media platform. The whole world is watching. Outside, more police cars arrived. Federal agents, state troopers, the senator's bodyguards surrendered their weapons. But the senator had one last card to play. James, he called out, tell them what really happened the night Catherine died. Tell them about the choice you made. All eyes turned to James Thompson. He stood shakily, facing his son. The night your mother died, he began, his voice breaking. The senator came to me, said she had to be stopped. I thought he just meant legally through the courts. I never imagined... You knew, David whispered. You knew they were going to kill her. I'm so sorry, James sobbed. The senator, he threatened to destroy everything. The company, our family, your future. I was weak, I was a coward. Sarah took David's hand as he absorbed this final betrayal. But before anyone could move, Martha's voice rang out from the doorway. That's not the whole truth, she said. Tell them the rest, James. Tell them what you did after. James looked at his son through tears. After she died, after I realized what they'd done, I started gathering evidence. Everything she had found, everything I knew, I put it all in that safety deposit box. I couldn't save her, but I made sure that someday, somehow, the truth would come out. The senator laughed coldly. How touching. But it doesn't matter now. By morning, every piece of evidence will disappear. Every witness will be silenced. You have no idea how far my power reaches. Actually, Eleanor said, holding up her phone, we do. Your fellow senators are watching this live broadcast right now. The Justice Department has already announced a full investigation, and your campaign manager just released a statement distancing himself from you. The senator's face turned purple with rage. He lunged for the nearest desk drawer, pulling out a gun that had been hidden there. If I'm going down, he snarled, aiming at David, I'm taking you with me. The shot rang out, but Sarah had already pushed David aside. As they fell, more shots echoed through the study. Detective Rodriguez and his officers took down the senator. When the chaos cleared, Sarah helped David to his feet. They were both shaken but unhurt. The senator lay on the floor, handcuffs clicking around his wrists as federal agents read him his rights. His power, his influence, his empire of corruption, all of it crumbling in front of Elena's cameras. But the night wasn't over yet. As the senator was led away, David's phone rang. It was the hospital near Silver Lake. "Mr. Thompson," the doctor said urgently, "we just found something in your mother's old medical records, something that changes everything." David and Sarah rushed to Silver Lake Memorial Hospital, followed by Rachel and Martha. The old doctor who had called them, Dr. Wilson, had been Catherine Thompson's personal physician. He waited for them in his office, holding a worn medical file. "I kept these records hidden," he explained, his hands shaking. "Your mother made me promise. She knew they might try to destroy everything." He pulled out a lab report dated just days before Catherine's death. She wasn't just gathering evidence about the chemical dumping. She was proving it was killing people. And she had found something else, a hidden research facility where they were testing new chemicals without approval. "We know all this," David said gently. "The senator confessed everything." "No," Dr. Wilson shook his head. "You don't understand. The facility, it wasn't just at Silver Lake. There were others, all over the country. Your mother found a list of locations of victims, children dying of mysterious cancers, entire communities poisoned." Sarah gasped as she read the report. "These chemicals, they're still being dumped in other lakes, other towns." "That's why they killed her," Dr. Wilson said. "Not just to protect Silver Lake, but to protect their entire operation. And there's something else." He pulled out an envelope. "Your mother left this with me, said if anything happened to her, I should wait until the truth about Silver Lake came out, then give it to you." David opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a letter and a key. "My dearest David," he read aloud, his voice breaking. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone, but the truth is finally coming out. The key opens a storage unit in Boston. Everything is there. Proof of all their operations, names of everyone involved, account numbers, shipping records. I couldn't save these people, but maybe you can. I love you so much. Never stop fighting for what's right. Love, Mom." Back at the Thompson mansion, Elena's news crew was broadcasting live as federal agents led away more arrested officials. Victoria was helping Detective Rodriguez sort through her father's files, finding connections to other contaminated sites. "Look at this," she said, holding up a document. Chemical Solutions had shell companies operating in 12 states. The same pattern everywhere. Bribes, threats, covered-up deaths. James Thompson sat quietly in his study, looking older than ever. "I knew," he admitted when David returned. "I knew it wasn't just Silver Lake, but I was too afraid to stop them." "You can help stop them now," Sarah said. "Testify about everything you know." Martha brought in the evening newspapers. The headlines screamed about the scandal. "Senator Morrison arrested. Nationwide chemical dumping conspiracy exposed. Silver Lake truth finally revealed." Rachel was coordinating with environmental groups, organizing testing at the other contaminated sites. Sarah's uncle Mario had already offered his fishing boats to help with water sampling. Mrs. Chen, the environmental lawyer, was working with a team of attorneys to file class action lawsuits. "We'll make them pay," she promised. "Every company, every official who helped cover this up." As night fell, David and Sarah stood by Silver Lake. The water still glowed unnaturally, but cleanup crews were already at work. Families gathered on the shore holding candles in memory of those they'd lost. "What do we do now?" Sarah asked softly. David held up his mother's key. "We go to Boston. We finish what she started. We save the other towns. We'll need help," Sarah said. "This is bigger than just us." As if in answer, they heard footsteps behind them. Victoria approached, followed by Detective Rodriguez, Rachel, Martha, Mario, and Elena. "Count us in," Victoria said. "All of us. Whatever it takes." David looked at these people who had risked everything for the truth. His father had chosen money and power over justice. But his mother had chosen to fight, to sacrifice everything to save others. Now it was his turn to choose. He took Sarah's hand, feeling the strength of her love and courage. "Mom's files will expose everything. Every contaminated site, every corrupt official, every victim who needs help. It won't be easy. Nothing worth doing ever is," Sarah smiled. Elena stepped forward. "The world is watching now. They can't hide anymore." David squeezed Sarah's hand as he looked out over the lake. The water rippled in the moonlight, and for a moment he thought he saw his mother's reflection, smiling proudly. "Let's get to work," he said. The next morning, as David and Sarah boarded a plane to Boston, Silver Lake was already changing. Cleanup crews worked around the clock. Investigators gathered evidence. Lawyers prepared cases. And families began to heal. The truth had finally come out. Not just about one lake, but about a nationwide web of corruption and poison. The fight wasn't over, it was just beginning. But this time, the people had something they'd never had before: hope. In the end, it wasn't just about exposing crimes or getting justice. It was about love. The love between a mother and son. The love between David and Sarah, the love for community and truth that had brought them all together. As the plane took off, Sarah rested her head on David's shoulder. "Your mother would be so proud of you." David smiled, holding his mother's key tightly. "She'd be proud of all of us." Below them, Silver Lake glittered in the morning sun. The water wasn't clean yet, but it would be. The truth wasn't fully exposed yet, but it would be. And the people responsible hadn't all faced justice yet, but they would. Because sometimes love is stronger than money. Sometimes truth is stronger than power. And sometimes the greatest legacy a mother can leave her son is the courage to fight for what's right. The story of Silver Lake was ending, but a new story was just beginning, and this time the good guys were going to win.